Time of death, the lead surgeon muttered, dropping his scalpel as the monitor flatlined into a continuous, deafening scream. The room surrendered to the inevitable. Yet, a quiet, unremarkable scrub nurse refused to step back. Snatching a steel clamp, she plunged her hands into the chaos, attempting the impossible. Operating Room 4 at Seattle Presbyterian was usually a place of controlled, freezing perfection. But at 2:14 a.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday, it was a slaughterhouse. On the table lay William Harford, a 42-year-old father of three who had been T-boned by a drunk driver running a red light in a stolen Ford F-150. Harford's chest cavity was a ruined landscape of shattered ribs and torn vessels, but the real nightmare was his descending aorta. It had shredded. Dr. Jordan Linfield, a senior attending surgeon with a reputation for arrogance that vastly outpaced his actual skill under fire, was drowning. His hands, double-gloved and slick, with dark arterial blood, were shaking. "More suction! I can't see a damn thing!" Linfield screamed, his voice cracking violently. The suction canister was already overflowing, a horrific crimson slurry bubbling up the tubing. "Where is the tear? God damn it, give me a DeBakey!" "No, a Satinsky clamp. Now!" Across from him, Abigail Hayes silently slapped the heavy steel instrument into his waiting palm. Abigail, known to everyone simply as Nurse Abby, was 28, unremarkable, and practically invisible. She had been at Seattle Presbyterian for just under 6 months, an agency hire who always took the worst graveyard shifts, never engaged in the break room gossip, and kept her hair tied back in a severe, joyless knot. The hospital administration viewed her as cheap, reliable labor. The surgical residents viewed her as a mute robot who handed them instruments. But as Abby watched Linfield plunge the clamp blindly into the dark pool of Harford's chest cavity, her brown eyes narrowed behind her splash guard mask. "He's going to clip the pulmonary artery," she thought. "He's panicking. He's lost his spatial orientation. Heart rate is plummeting. Dr. Linfield, we are losing pressure," barked Dr. Mitchell, the veteran anesthesiologist sitting behind the drape. His tone was tight, the professional veneer stripping away to reveal sheer terror. "Pressure is 40 over palpable. He's bleeding out. You need to gain control right now." "I am trying!" Linfield roared, the sweat pouring down his forehead and stinging his eyes. The circulating nurse, a terrified new graduate named Harper, rushed over to dab his brow, but Linfield violently jerked his head away. "Don't touch me!" "Just get Croft on the phone. Where the hell is the chief?" "Dr. Croft is 20 minutes out, doctor," Harper stammered, clutching the bloody gauze. "We don't have 20 minutes. We don't have 2 minutes," Mitchell yelled over the rhythmic, terrifying beep, beep, beep of the failing heart monitor. The blood volume in the cavity was rising too fast. Linfield had clamped blindly, and as Abby had predicted, he missed the aortic tear entirely, instead crushing a mass of surrounding tissue. The tear ripped further. A sudden, violent geyser of bright red blood erupted from the chest cavity, splashing directly onto Linfield's face shield. Linfield froze. It was a phenomenon that military doctors called vapor lock. The human brain, overwhelmed by catastrophic sensory input and the sudden, crushing realization of imminent failure, simply shuts down. Linfield's hands stopped moving. He stared into the cavern of Harford's chest, watching the life literally pump out of the man, and he stopped breathing. "Jordan!" Mitchell shouted from the anesthesia cart. "Do something! Clamp the aorta! Pack it! Anything!" Linfield slowly lowered his hands. He took a deliberate step back from the sterile field. His voice, when it came, was a hollow, defeated whisper. "It's gone. The tear is completely posterior. It's unclampable. We can't salvage." The room plunged into a suffocating silence, save for the horrifying, erratic alarm of the monitor. "Time of death." Linfield started, staring blankly at the wall clock. No, the word was spoken softly, but it cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Linfield blinked, snapping his gaze across the table. Abby hadn't moved back. Her gloved hands were still hovering right over the sterile field. "Excuse me, nurse?" Linfield sneered, defensive anger instantly replacing his shock. "I said step back. The patient is gone." "He has 30 seconds of cerebral perfusion left," Abby said. Her voice was unrecognizable. The timid, quiet junior nurse was gone. In her place was an ice-cold, resonant authority that made the hairs on the back of Mitchell's neck stand up. Harper, step on the suction pedal. Mitchell, push 4 units of ONEG on the rapid infuser and give me 1 milligram of epi. Now. What the hell do you think you're doing? Linfield screamed, lunging forward to grab her arm. You are a scrub nurse. You step away from that table. Abby didn't look at him. With a speed that defied logic, she dropped her left elbow, blocking Linfield's arm, and used her right hand to violently hip-check him backward. The senior attending stumbled, his boots slipping on the bloody linoleum, and crashed into the supply cart. Before anyone could scream, Abby stepped directly into Linfield's place at the head of the table. Mitchell, the epi! Abby barked. Mitchell, operating purely on instinct and the overwhelming command in her voice, slammed the syringe into the IV port. Epi in! Abby plunged both of her hands straight into the dark, blinding pool of blood in Harford's chest. She didn't use a clamp. She didn't use a suction. She used her bare, gloved fingers. Close your eyes, Abby told herself. Sight is useless here. Feel the flow. Feel the heat. She slipped her left hand past the shattered ribs, ignoring the jagged bone edges that scraped violently against her forearms. Deep in the thoracic cavity, her fingers navigated the slick, pulsing anatomy. She bypassed the lung, slid beneath the esophagus, and found the massive, torn trunk of the descending aorta. The pressure of the escaping blood was like a fire hose beneath the surface. It was a massive, ragged blowout tear on the backside of the vessel. Got you. With brutal precision, Abby clamped her left thumb directly over the tear, pinning the shredded artery against Harford's thoracic spine. She squeezed with a bone-crushing grip. Instantly, the welling pool of blood in the chest cavity stopped rising. Suction, Abby commanded, her voice terrifyingly calm. Harper, trembling uncontrollably, leaned in with the Yankauer suction tip. The machine gurgled loudly, quickly draining the remaining pooled blood. As the cavity cleared, the surgical team gasped. There was Abby's hand, buried deep in the chest, her thumb acting as a human tourniquet against the spine. Pressure is. My God, pressure is rebounding, Mitchell stammered, staring at his monitor as if it were performing a magic trick. 80/50. Heart rate, 90. He's perfusing. Linfield pulled himself up from the floor, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. You can't hold that forever. The tear is too big to suture. You'd need a synthetic graft, and you can't place a graft while occluding it with your hand. It's a dead end. You're just delaying the inevitable, you stupid girl. Abby finally looked up at Linfield. Her eyes were dead, devoid of any warmth or panic. I don't need a graft. I need a bovine pericardial patch and a 4-0 proline on a curved needle. Harper, open the patch. Mitchell, drop his systolic to 60 so I don't blow the repair when I sew. Dropping pressure, Mitchell said, his fingers flying over his dials. He was no longer taking orders from the attending. The hierarchy of the hospital had dissolved. In that room, there was only one God, and she was wearing a scrub nurse's name tag. You are going to kill him, Linfield hissed. When Chief Croft gets here, you are going to prison for practicing medicine without a license. Shut up, Abby snapped. She held out her right hand. Needle driver, loaded. Harper fumbled with the instruments, finally snapping the needle into the heavy tungsten jaws of the driver and handing it to Abby. What followed over the next 12 minutes was something Dr. Mitchell would later describe as a hallucination. Abigail Hayes, a 28-year-old junior scrub nurse, performed a posterior descending aortic patch angioplasty blind. Because she could not move her left thumb without letting Harford bleed to death, she used her right hand to drive the needle through the synthetic patch into the fragile, torn tissue of the aorta and back out, suturing entirely by feel. Her wrist flicked with the mechanical, terrifying speed of a sewing machine. She threw knots one-handed, sliding them down into the bloody cavern with her index finger, tightening them perfectly against the pounding pressure of the heart. Stitch, pull, lock. Stitch, pull, lock. It was a technique that didn't exist in standard medical textbooks. It was dirty, it was desperate, and it was violently efficient. Done, Abby breathed. Slowly, agonizingly, she eased the pressure of her left thumb off the spine. The team held their collective breath. Mitchell leaned so far over the drape he nearly fell. The patch held. The aorta swelled, pulsing with life, rushing oxygenated blood down to Harford's dying organs. But the chest cavity remained remarkably dry. The bleeding had completely stopped. "Pressure is 1 to 10 over 70, Mitchell whispered, tears suddenly pricking his eyes. "He's stable. I don't believe it. He's entirely stable." Linfield stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He stared at the pristine line of sutures. It was better than perfect. It was a masterpiece of surgical engineering. Abby slowly pulled her hands out of the chest cavity. She stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin with a wet slap. "Wash out the cavity and close him up, Dr. Linfield," Abby said quietly, reverting instantly to her soft, unassuming tone. "I'm feeling a little nauseous. I think I need to take my break." Before anyone could say a word, she turned and pushed through the heavy OR doors, disappearing into the sterile hallway. Less than 60 seconds later, the doors violently crashed open again. Dr. Harrison Croft, the legendary chief of surgery, stormed into the room. He was a massive man in his late 50s, commanding and intimidating, still wearing his trench coat over his scrubs. "Report!" Croft barked, stripping off his coat and snapping on a pair of gloves. "Where is the massive bleeder? How much time do we have?" He marched up to the table, fully expecting to see a corpse. Instead, he saw a stabilized patient, a perfectly dry chest cavity, and a beautifully patched aorta. Croft stopped dead. He leaned down, adjusting his surgical loops to magnify the repair. He traced the suture line with his eyes. The spacing was millimeter perfect. The knots were tied with a highly specific, interlocking military friction hitch, a knot designed to withstand concussive blasts. Croft slowly stood up and looked at Linfield, who was still paralyzed on the other side of the table. "Jordan?" Croft said, his voice dropping an octave. "Did you do this?" Linfield swallowed hard. He looked at the door. He looked at Croft. Panic and ego warred in his eyes, but the absolute impossibility of the lie choked him. "No, sir." Croft's eyes narrowed. "Then who finished that impossible surgery?" Linfield pointed a trembling finger toward the empty scrub room. "Just a junior nurse, Abigail." Croft stared at the door. "A nurse?" he whispered. He looked back down at the surgical field, his blood running cold. He had only seen a patch job like this once in his entire life. It was 12 years ago, inside a black site trauma tent in Fallujah, performed by a clandestine operative known only in military circles as the Ghost of Kandahar. "Mitchell," Croft said, his voice tight. "Don't let anyone touch this patient. I need to make a phone call." Croft backed away from the table, sprinting out of the OR. But by the time he reached the locker rooms, Abigail Hayes' locker was empty. Her scrub uniform was folded neatly on the bench, her ID badge resting on top. The junior nurse was gone, but the nightmare she left behind was just beginning. Dr. Harrison Croft locked the heavy oak door of his private office, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a prepaid burner phone from the false bottom of his desk drawer. He bypassed the hospital's secure network entirely, punching in a heavily encrypted 13-digit international number he hadn't dialed in nearly a decade. The line hissed with harsh static for 10 agonizing seconds before a gruff, heavily guarded voice answered. "This routing is restricted," General Bradley Lawson rumbled from a secure military installation halfway across the globe. "Identify yourself." "Bradley, it's Harrison Croft, Seattle Presbyterian." A heavy, suffocating pause filled the line. "Harrison, it's 3 a.m. on the West Coast. You don't use this specific frequency unless the sky is actively falling." "I just walked out of operating room 4, Croft said, his voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. "I had a patient, a civilian trauma, massive thoracic crush injury. The descending aorta was completely shredded. Posterior tear." The attending surgeon froze. The patient was effectively dead, but someone else stepped in and performed a blind posterior patch angioplasty. Lawson exhaled sharply. "Blind?" "Entirely by feel, one-handed. But that's not why I'm calling, Bradley. It's the knot." The surgeon used a reinforced, interlocking military friction hitch. Millimeter perfect spacing. I stared at that suture line, and my blood ran completely cold. I have only seen that specific mechanical signature one time in my entire career, 12 years ago. Fallujah. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, stretching out so long that Croft thought the connection had been severed. When Lawson finally spoke, his tone was entirely devoid of emotion. "Describe the individual." A junior scrub nurse. Agency hire. Went by the name Abigail Hayes. Quiet, unassuming, 28 years old. Brown hair, brown eyes. Practically invisible until she physically assaulted my senior, attending to take control of the sterile field. "Where is she right now?" Lawson demanded, the urgency suddenly spiking in his voice. "Gone. Cleaned out her locker and vanished before I could even strip off my gloves." Croft wiped a bead of cold sweat from his temple. "Bradley, tell me I'm losing my mind. Tell me Major Evelyn Cross is still dead." General Lawson sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that carried the weight of 100 classified secrets. "Major Cross officially died in a helicopter crash over the Hindu Kush 4 years ago, Harrison. Her remains were formally identified. She was buried with full honors at Arlington." The Pentagon closed the file. "Do not read me the official press release," Croft snapped, his frustration boiling over. "I know what I saw in that chest cavity. That was Evelyn's work. She was the only field surgeon in the entire Special Operations Command who could perform that specific blind repair. They called her the Ghost of Kandahar for a reason. Why is she hiding as a scrub nurse in my hospital?" "If it really is Evelyn," Lawson said quietly, "then you have a much bigger problem than a falsified employment application. 4 years ago, she was the primary surgeon for a high-value extraction. The VIP was a rogue intelligence broker who possessed a decrypted ledger of multinational black market arms deals. Evelyn kept him alive through a hellish firefight, but the broker later died in CIA custody under highly suspicious circumstances. Powerful people wanted that ledger buried, and they wanted Evelyn permanently silenced because she heard the broker's dying confession. Croft felt his stomach plummet into an icy abyss, so the helicopter crash was staged, Lawson confirmed grimly. "A handful of us helped her disappear. We wiped her biometric data, gave her a new face, a new background, and strictly ordered her to never, ever practice high-level medicine again. Her surgical signature is too unique. If she exposed herself to save that patient tonight, the algorithmic monitoring systems used by the NSA and private contractors will flag the anomaly in the hospital's surgical reports by morning." "I haven't filed the surgical report yet," Croft said quickly. "It doesn't matter," Lawson interrupted. "Did anyone else witness the surgery?" "Yes, the anesthesiologist, a circulating nurse, and Dr. Linfield. Then the leak is already happening. Listen to me very carefully, Harrison. The people hunting Evelyn do not leave loose ends. If they realize she is alive, they will sterilize the entire situation. They will eliminate her, they will eliminate the patient she saved to erase the physical evidence of her work, and they will eliminate anyone who was in that operating room. You need to evacuate that patient and get your surgical team out of the building immediately." Before Croft could respond, a deafening, terrifying code alarm began blaring through the overhead hospital speakers. The flashing red strobe lights outside his frosted glass window cut through the dark office. Code blue. Intensive care unit, bed 7. Code blue. Intensive care unit, bed 7. Croft dropped the burner phone. Bed 7. That was Harford. He burst out of his office, sprinting down the sterile white corridor toward the elevators. The hospital, usually a quiet sanctuary at this hour, felt suddenly like a trap. Meanwhile, 3 floors down in the subterranean parking garage, Evelyn Cross, the woman the hospital knew as Nurse Abby, was aggressively tossing a duffel bag into the trunk of her battered Honda Civic. She had stripped off her bloody scrubs, changing into a dark, tactical jacket and black cargo pants. She knew the rules. She had broken the cardinal directive of her survival. By stepping up to that operating table, by deploying the friction hitch, she had effectively fired a flare gun into the dark sky, alerting the deadliest hunters on the planet to her exact coordinates. But letting a father of 3 bleed to death on a cold steel table simply because a pompous surgeon panicked was a line Evelyn absolutely refused to cross. She slammed the trunk shut and reached for the driver's side door handle. Suddenly, her specialized police scanner, hidden beneath the dashboard, crackled to life, picking up the internal hospital frequency. Code blue. Intensive care unit, bed 7. Evelyn froze. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Harford was in bed 7. But Harford's vitals had been absolutely rock solid when she left him. A properly executed pericardial patch does not simply fail spontaneously within an hour. It holds, always. Her mind raced, connecting the tactical dots with terrifying speed. the drunk driver who T-boned Harford's car, a stolen F-150, running a red light at 2 a.m. with no skid marks on the pavement. It wasn't an accident. It was a targeted assassination attempt. Harford wasn't just a random civilian. He was a target. And whoever hit him had just realized he survived the surgery. Evelyn cursed violently under her breath. She could get in the car right now and disappear forever into the rainy Seattle night. It was the only logical, safe choice. Instead, she popped the trunk, unzipped her duffel bag, and pulled out a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. She racked the slide, chambering around with a sharp, metallic click. "Damn it," she whispered, sprinting back toward the stairwell. The intensive care unit was spiraling into pure chaos. The heart monitor connected to William Harford was screaming a flatline tone. Dr. Jordan Linfield, desperate to reclaim his shattered ego and prove his competence after the humiliation in the OR, had rushed to the bedside. "Push 1 milligram of epinephrine. Start chest compressions," he yelled at the terrified ICU nurses. "His chest is surgically compromised, Dr. Linfield," one of the nurses shouted back. "If we do compressions, we could blow the aortic repair." "I don't care. He's crashing. Do it," Linfield demanded, his face flushed with panic. None of them noticed the tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a janitorial uniform, casually standing in the shadows near the medication dispensary. He held an empty syringe in his gloved hand. Just 90 seconds earlier, he had slipped into Harford's room and pushed a massive, lethal dose of potassium chloride directly into the IV line. It was an untraceable method that mimicked a sudden, catastrophic heart attack. The assassin, a contractor hired by a shadow corporation to ensure Harford never testified about a massive chemical spill cover-up, watched the monitor with cold satisfaction. The job was done. He turned to walk toward the exit stairwell. As he pushed open the heavy fire door, a hand reached out of the darkness, grabbing him by the throat with the terrifying strength of a steel vise. Before the assassin could react, Evelyn Cross pivoted her hips, driving her knee brutally into the man's solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for air, she slammed the heavy steel fire door directly into his face. Bone crunched loudly. The man collapsed onto the concrete landing, completely unconscious. Evelyn didn't waste a single second looking at him. She holstered her weapon and burst into the ICU hallway, sprinting toward bed 7. "Get away from him!" Evelyn roared, shoving past 2 security guards and storming into the glass-walled room. Linfield spun around, his eyes widening in shock. "You! How dare you come back here? Security! Arrest this woman!" "Shut up and step away from the patient, Linfield. You're about to kill him again," Evelyn barked. She grabbed Harford's IV bag, instantly noticing the milky residue of the potassium chloride in the tubing. Potassium overdose, her mind calculated instantly. Heart is locked in diastole. Compressions won't restart the electrical rhythm. He needs an antagonist. "He's in chemical cardiac arrest," Evelyn shouted, ripping the contaminated IV line out of Harford's arm. "I need calcium gluconate, 10%, push 2 amps, and get me an amp of sodium bicarbonate, right now." The ICU nurses, recognizing the absolute, unquestionable authority in her voice, the exact same authority she had wielded in the OR, instantly obeyed, ignoring Linfield completely. "You can't just barge in here," Linfield started, stepping forward. Evelyn didn't even look at him. She backhanded him squarely in the chest, sending the senior surgeon stumbling backward into a rolling tray of surgical instruments. "I said stay out of my way!" "Calcium is in," a nurse shouted, slamming the syringe into a fresh IV port. "Bicarb is following." "Clear the bed," Evelyn commanded. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles, smearing them with conductive gel. She cranked the dial to 200 joules. "Clear." She slammed the heavy paddles onto Harford's chest, positioning them carefully to avoid the fresh surgical incision, and pressed the shock buttons. Harford's body arched violently off the mattress. Evelyn stared at the monitor. The flatline wavered, spiked, and then nothing. "Bump it to 300. "Charge," she ordered, her voice cold as ice. The machine whined with lethal electricity. "Clear!" Thump. The body convulsed. Evelyn kept her eyes glued to the digital screen. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was only the green, horizontal line of death. Then, a jagged spike. Then, another. Beep, 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 beep. The sinus rhythm established itself. The blood pressure slowly began to climb back from the abyss. Harford's chest rose and fell, with the rhythmic push of the mechanical ventilator. The calcium had neutralized the potassium. The heart was beating on its own again. A collective, shuddering gasp of relief echoed through the room. The nurses leaned against the walls, totally exhausted. Linfield sat on the floor among the scattered medical supplies, his face buried in his hands, finally broken by the sheer magnitude of his own inadequacy. Evelyn stepped back from the bed, wiping a streak of sweat from her forehead. She looked at the monitor one last time to ensure the rhythm was stable. "Good work, ladies," Evelyn said softly to the ICU nurses. "Keep him on a continuous calcium drip and monitor his electrolytes closely." She turned to leave, but the glass door slid open, blocking her path. Dr. Harrison Croft stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his eyes locked onto Evelyn. He looked at the stabilized patient, then at the terrified Linfield on the floor, and finally back to the woman he had just spoken to General Lawson about. "Nurse Abby," Croft said, his voice thick, with a profound, heavy respect. "Dr. Croft," Evelyn replied, her expression entirely unreadable. "I believe my shift ended an hour ago." Croft stepped fully into the room, letting the glass door slide shut behind him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys. He tossed them through the air. Evelyn caught them effortlessly. She glanced down. A Mercedes emblem gleamed in the harsh fluorescent light. "My car is parked in the physician's private lot on the south side. License plate is registered to a Shell LLC. It has a full tank of gas and $5,000 in emergency cash in the glove compartment," Croft said quietly, making sure Linfield couldn't hear him. "There is a man unconscious in the stairwell. I will tell the police he attacked my ICU and that you bravely fought him off before fleeing in terror." Evelyn looked up at the legendary chief of surgery. For the first time all night, the hard, icy armor in her eyes cracked just a fraction, revealing the weary, battered soldier underneath. "Why are you doing this, Harrison?" she whispered, using his first name. "Because a doctor's first oath is to do no harm," Croft replied softly. "And your oath, Major Cross, seems to be saving the lives that everyone else has given up on? We need ghosts like you out there." Evelyn nodded, once a silent, ultimate gesture of gratitude. She slipped past him, stepping out into the hallway. By the time the police sirens began wailing in the distance, echoing through the rainy streets of Seattle, the physician's parking lot was empty. The ghost of Kandahar had vanished into the shadows once again, leaving behind a perfectly patched aorta, a disgraced surgeon, and a legend that would be whispered in the break rooms of Seattle Presbyterian for decades to come. Did this medical thriller keep you on the edge of your seat? The ghost of Kandahar might be out there right now, hiding in plain sight. If you loved this incredible story of survival, secret identities, and unyielding courage, hit that like button immediately. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding true medical mysteries and high-stakes drama. Drop a comment below right now. What would you do in Abby's shoes?
Hi, my name's Tranthan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, "Who finished that impossible surgery?" the chief surgeon asked. "Just a junior." They ans. "I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel?" What stayed with me most was the contrast between panic and quiet confidence. The story reminds us that people are not always what they seem, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks may have the strength, skill, or courage to make the biggest difference. It also leaves us with a simple lesson. Staying calm under pressure and doing what's right can matter more than status or recognition. Have you ever seen someone surprise everyone by stepping up when it mattered most? And if you were in Abby's position, would you have taken the same risk to help someone in need? If this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and consider liking or subscribing to support more stories like this.